Welcome back. In the United States, the chronic illness diabetes affects millions, but unfortunately, due to the high cost of insulin, many patients cannot afford the life saving medication they need to survive. The documentary Pay or Die sheds light on the struggles of families as they try to manage the high cost of life saving medications. Let's take a look at the trailer.
I remember every single day, birthdays, vacations. I have a hard time remembering the day of the funeral.
I'm type 1 diabetic. My daughter is a type 1 diabetic. You need to do a shot.
I can't do it.
I lost my job, and then we lost our home.
The person who has type 1 diabetes will not survive without taking insulin.
Oh my God.
In the States, medicine is handled like a business. In Canada, it's healthcare.
And I could come to Canada and save $1,555.10.
In 96, insulin was $21. 2019 goes to almost $300, over a 1,000% price increase.
And that's killing people. My son died because he struggled to afford the one medicine created to save his life. We made a pact that no other family will go through the pain that we're going through.
This has to stop.
When you're fighting big pharma, there are no guarantees.
I will not rest until I have seen justice for the lives that pharma and our government has taken.
Joshua! Joshua! Jesse! Jesse! Justice for Alex! Justice for Alex!
My biggest worry is staying alive.
What do we want? When do we want it? Enough is enough. We gotta change the system.
Director and producer of the film, Rachael Dyer, now joins me to discuss Pay or Die. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Kibin.
Now, can you talk about, the documentary Pay or Die?
Sure. Well, as you just saw watching the trailer, it really reads as America's true horror story. Unfortunately, there are just so many type 1 diabetics specifically out there who don't have access to their life-saving medication, insulin. Unfortunately, it's just too expensive for them to be able to afford. Throughout the documentary, we showcase kind of three key stories and looking at it from different perspectives. We look at the emotional toll, the physical toll, and the financial toll of what this disease does for so many people. We follow a mother and her husband who lost their son Alec due to rationing insulin, which unfortunately has become a household term to ration one's insulin. Then we also follow a mother and daughter who are both type 1 diabetics, and unfortunately they became homeless because they had to choose their rent or their life-saving medication. And then we also follow a young woman named Cara who was diagnosed at the height of COVID, and we show her just how challenging the illness is to kind of navigate through, like what everyone else was dealing with at the time during COVID as well.
Now, what inspired you to actually explore this and create this documentary?
Sure. So our other director, Scott Ruderman, he is a type 1 diabetic. So he knew firsthand what it was like to live with the condition, but not specifically to not be able to afford it due to insulin rationing. But over time, as a documentary maker, he had heard that there are so many people with type 1 diabetes out there that are forced to ration. And when I first came here, I was a journalist and I was covering a lot of medical refugee stories of Americans traveling to either Mexico or Canada to access their life-saving medication. So when we met and came together and I found out that Scott was a type 1 diabetic, I said, why don't you come with me to Canada? And you can see for yourself that there are so many people that are traveling across the border to access their life-saving medication. So he came with me and we went into quite a few pharmacies, and it was heartbreaking to watch because he broke down and just cried because he couldn't believe that for the first time he was in a country that accepted him for who he was, and his home country didn't, because there he just simply couldn't afford it. So to put it in perspective, a vial of insulin that would last him about 10 days to a week, in Canada at the time it cost between 19 and 21 Canadian dollars. Here it's over $300 out of pocket. So it's an exorbitant cost that Americans are having to face every day if they don't have insurance.
And I'm curious to know what that experience was like for you, and how was it working with Scott on this film, especially since it is so close to home for him.
Yeah, I think that the film. It did carry a huge emotional toll for us, obviously, working so closely with the subjects. We worked on the film for, just over 4 years, but and intimately, very intimately. It was primarily just the two of us in the field for the majority of the time. But we did that to ensure that we could build really strong relationships with our subject and build trust. And because Scott did have type 1 diabetes, and I was a carer and a partner of his, they were able to relate to us very, very quickly because we shared the same, stories as them. We understood what they were going through, but it did make it quite a challenge because there were times when, Cara was first learning and she might not be able to administer her, medication properly. But, we wanted to jump in and help, but we didn't because we knew that we needed to get this scene so everyone could really see how difficult and, complicated and expensive that this illness can be for so many.
Now, you talked about some of the families. What was the process of getting families to share this very vulnerable side of them? I know sometimes people, it is a very private thing, and they're this very heavily emotional experience that they're going through. So, what was the experience or the challenge of getting people to share this with an audience?
I think, again, it came back to us spending so much time with the subjects and really building trust and building strong relationships and friendships now outside of the film. But also, too, I think that they knew that, especially for Nicole and James, who lost their son, Alec, they didn't want anyone to go through what the pain and struggle that they've been through. So they really wanted to make sure that this issue was the forefront for so many people, and a lot of people who didn't know about it would be able to understand that this is happening all too often in America. The other unfortunate thing is that we actually had so many people reach out to us who wanted to share their story. This is unfortunately all too common. So many people who are rationing their insulin, so many people who can't afford it. So we had a number of people willing to come forward and want to share what they're all going through.
And can you talk about rationing insulin a little bit? I've heard the term a few times now, and I think maybe for someone who's not familiar, they may not know what that is. So can you just expand on that?
Of course. So insulin rationing is a term that is used amongst type 1 diabetics and diabetics, whereas they try to stretch out their medication to last as long as possible. So if you're a type 1 diabetic, it is very different to type 2. Type 1, you are insulin dependent. You have to take your insulin multiple times a day in order to survive. You won't survive without taking that insulin, at a max period of about 3 days. So what happens is when a lot of people can't afford it, they try to take the most little amount as possible until then they can find, their next insulin pen or get their paycheck, which was what happened in Alec's case. It was just 3 days until his next paycheck would come in. So he was trying to stretch out his medicine to be able to survive for those 3 days. But unfortunately, didn't. And this is the common problem of what is happening, especially with so many 26-year-olds, because that's when they come off their parents' health insurance. So they're trying to make it on their own and to be able to survive without being on their parents' health insurance anymore, but just aren't able to. So we see a lot of 26-year-olds who are dying because they're trying to insulin ration.
Now, this leads into my next question about the title, which is very straightforward, Pay or Die. And I think it really highlights and sets the tone of the documentary. Can you talk about the title just in general and how it reflects on the current state of health in America and pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, of course. So, yes, it is a very strong and memorable title, but one we wanted to choose for the film because it says exactly what is happening. People in America, for a lot of life-saving medications, not just access to insulin, you either have to pay or the worst result that can happen is you die. And there are so many Americans dying. And we wanted to use insulin as kind of the tip of the iceberg as what is of what is happening in the American healthcare system for a lot of life-saving medications, but it's not just insulin and people with diabetes who are being affected. It's also people on EpiPens, asthma puffers, cancer medications, where the prices are just so exorbitant that a lot of people can't afford it. So they're having to make that really difficult choice. In Sandra and Emma's case, it was choose a roof over their head. Unfortunately, in Alex's case, he passed away.
Now, can you talk, or you described pay or die as a call to action. Can you just expand on, what you meant by that?
Of course. So I think that the main thing that we want to do with this documentary is educate, Americans to understand that this is happening today. This is happening in first world America, and it shouldn't be a privilege to have to be able to buy your life-saving medication in this country. It should be a human right. It is a very complex system that is systematically set up to be very complicated with the pharmaceutical companies, with PBMs, with the insurance companies. But unfortunately, the people that are suffering are the patients. Big Pharma did come out earlier this year and reduce their prices. But what we want everyone to know is that was a voluntary action. So it means that they can raise those prices to whatever they want, whenever they want again. So what we need everyone to do is to write to their legislator, to write to their representatives and try and get a federal bill passed that will cap the price of insulin so that we won't be in this toing and froing with the big pharmaceutical companies anymore and held at ransom.
And I also want to highlight, earlier in the interview, you mentioned that there are different layers that the film explores. Can you just highlight, some of those themes and how it kind of shines a light on life with illness in America?
Yeah, of course. So we wanted to ensure that there was 3 kind of main topics that we were covering, both the physical aspect of living with a life-threatening condition, a emotional toll, and the emotional toll that has living with type 1 diabetes is 24/7. You do not have a choice of whether you want to administer that medication day in or day out. You have to do it. So it becomes very exhausting, very tiring, very complicated. So we wanted to really kind of show that through the film too, emotionally, and what other couples or siblings or families have to go through in addition to the individual with the condition. Then we wanted to show the final piece of the puzzle, which in America, it's financial. So even though so many people are going through the physical and emotional, here it's a financial toll and a financial burden. So many people are worrying, how am I going to afford that medicine to be able to survive tomorrow? So much so that a lot of people that have, fall in what we call this gap, this financial gap. So some people have made too much money to be able to go on subsidies like Medicaid, but then not enough to be able to afford their medication. So there's a huge gap of people that are kind of stuck in this hole of, not knowing where their next, insulin is going to come from because they can't afford to pay for it out of pocket.
Well, I appreciate you, coming here and having this conversation. I also want to take a time to talk about what you brought in today, because I think there's a really interesting story behind this. As somebody who, has to live closely and know someone that, is living with diabetes, can you just share a little bit about what you brought in?
Yeah, of course. So this tea tin was made in honor of, by Hani and Sons in honor of Banting and Best. So Banting and Best were the inventors of insulin, and they were Canadian, and they sold the patent for insulin for $1, for $1 Canadian, to ensure that no one would make a profit for it. So that's just a stark reminder of, how far we've come. And unfortunately in America, that now prices of insulin, had gone well above $300. But the original ideology of these inventors was that it was going to be medication for all, and that, there wasn't profit to be made. And then this is just a tote bag that is highlighting the film, which our film Pay or Die is going to be coming out on World Diabetes Day, 14th of November on Paramount Plus. So we really encourage everyone to watch the documentary. Even if they don't know anything about type 1 diabetes, everyone can relate to the American healthcare system and the struggles with it, and also to live through the emotional, journey of the characters that we're following in the story.
Well, I want to thank you so much for, joining us and sharing this story and sharing a little part of you that, that you've learned about yourself and that you have to, live through as well, making the film. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much, Kibin.
If you would like to learn more about this film, please go to their website at www.payorddiefilm.com. And please don't forget to follow them on social media at Pay or Die Film. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recapable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Jaime on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.